All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. I think this is the fifth entry in
Fifth
WIRSPA's
or
Icon series.
I've lost
Yeah,
track
fifth or
myself.
sixth.
Yeah, I have that one.
there's
How many
there's
what I've done? I've lost track.
there's many icons of Caribbean rum, but we have a very special one with us today. As always, your host is WIRSPA Community Envoy Matt Petrick, and joining him today is Dr. Frank Ward, former managing director at the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay and former WIRSPA chairman. Matt's going to give you a more formal introduction in just a moment. Real quick before we dive in, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co, and just want to point out a few ways, as always, that you can interact throughout the show today. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from. I know we have people from all around the world today, which is always really cool to see. If you have a question for Matt or Frank during the show today, there's a little button at the bottom of the screen that says Ask a Question. So just click that button, type your question in, and Matt and I will be keeping an eye out for those throughout the show. And last but not least, feel free to invite anyone you'd like to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes it easy to do that. But with that out of the way, Matt, I will turn things over to you now.
Thank you, Will. Pleasure to be here again. It's a pleasure for me to be doing this Icon series. It's a dream for me to be able to talk to all these people who have so influenced Caribbean rum over the last 50 years. You know, as a historian, this is just a fantastic opportunity to hear their stories and capture them and share them with you. So, we are, when we conceived this Icon series. With WIRSPA and Vaughn and I, we conceived this idea. We knew Frank Ward was immediately we're going to have Frank Ward on. Frank needs to be part of this. So, like Will said, Frank is a former managing director of the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay. And you'll notice I didn't say Mount Gay, and we'll get into that in a little bit, what that distinction is. But beyond that, he was also the WIRSPA chairman, and also either, I forget whether the longest or second longest, they're both about the same. You and your predecessor, both WIRSPA chairman for 10 years, and oversaw a tremendous change in the Caribbean rum industry during those times. And thanks to your leadership, I believe Caribbean rum is in a much better place than it was before your tenureship. So again, it's an honor to see you here, Frank. Thank you for doing this. So let's jump right in. The Ward family. You're obviously, you've been referred to as the last Ward. I know it's not exactly true like that, but the Ward family, there's many Wards in Barbados. Tell us about growing up in the Ward family and as part of now one of the most world famous rum distilleries.
Well, Matt, where shall I begin? My earliest memories of Mount Gay and the distillery would have been when I was about 6-7 years old, and as my parents, we lived at the Mount Gay distillery for a few months before we moved to Christchurch. The history of that was that my parents met in the UK. My mother was from St. Vincent, my father was from Barbados. They met in the UK. And when I was born, my mother took myself and my siblings to St. Vincent to stay with her parents, and then she went back to the UK. And then we finally moved to Barbados when I was about 5 or 6. And so my earliest memories would basically be running around the actual distillery. And of course, in those days, health and safety regulations were not as stringent as they are now. So my memories of going and looking at the open wooden vats of the fermenting molasses, and then going to another side of the still to watch the coffee still, because at that time, the copper coffee still, which has been recommissioned by Mount Gay, that was the main continuous still. And we used to sit with the distiller and just observe what he did. So we basically had the run of the distillery. So that's where I got my initial flavor of the rum industry.
Was that when you developed your taste for rum?
Actually, no, I was not really a rum drinker when I was old enough to legally drink. I preferred beer and Scotch whiskey, actually.
Okay.
I started drinking rum when I left Trinidad, University in Trinidad, and I spent a few months at Mount Gay Distilleries Limited before I moved to the UK. And my uncle, great uncle Darnley, who was the managing director of Mount Gay Distilleries at the time, he used to insist that I come to his office every lunchtime around midday to drink rum with him. And he always brought out his special stock of double distilled pot still rum. So
Okay.
that's what I drank. And in those days, even then, he said that that double distilled pot still rum was just as good as or better than a good malt whiskey or a good cognac.
I agree. So you weren't originally intending to go into the rum industry. What did you think you were going to do as your career, and how did that transition to you ending up at Mount Gay?
Well, actually, when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. The one thing that I was quite good at was chemistry, but I didn't know how I was going to apply that to a career. So when I started university in Trinidad, actually was engineering. And I quickly realized that that's not for me. So I switched to pure sciences and I did my degree in chemistry and botany. And somewhere along the line there, I came upon this discipline called toxicology. And I thought that fit the bill in every respects for me. So I then went off to the UK and did my master's and PhD in toxicology. And I continued to work in the UK as a research scientist dealing with toxicological matters. I then got tired of, I would say, primarily living in the UK, the weather, the weather. So I decided to pack up and come back to Barbados.
Okay.
So I spent a year or two teaching chemistry at the University of the West Indies Capefield branch here. And then I moved to St. Lucia to work for a CARICOM organization dealing with environmental health. And I was in charge of their laboratory facilities. I stayed there for 5 years, and my family wanted me to come back to Barbados to join the industry, so I eventually did that. So I
Okay.
actually, my real formal introduction to the rum industry was in 1998 when I joined the Rum Refinery at Mount Gay.
Okay.
But prior to that, when I was doing my degree in Trinidad, for my final year, I had to do a summer placement, and I actually did that at Angostura.
Oh, interesting. So you've worked at so before Mount Gay, you actually worked at St. Lucia Distillers and Angostura.
No, no, not St. Lucia Distillers. In St. Lucia, my work was with
Oh, okay.
environmental health.
Okay,
Environmental health.
right. Okay, that's right. But okay, so at least Angostura, you worked at Trinidad Distillers before you worked at Mount Gay.
For a summer, for one summer.
Ah, excellent. Okay. So in those days, in those sort of early days, that was around the time that the Mount Gay, as we sort of think of it as today, was actually two different companies, or sort of split into two different companies. Evolved. It had actually split much earlier. Tell us about the distinction between, for people who don't know, the distinction between Mount Gay, as we think of it today, and the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay. Tell us about that, how that came to be in that distinction.
Well, there were always two companies because many years ago there was a law in Barbados which stated that you could not sell rum from the same location where it was distilled. So Mount Gay Distilleries Limited was created as a joint venture between A.F. Ward, my great grandfather, and John F. Hudson to market and sell the products coming from the distillery in St. Lucie. So that really is the genesis of the two companies, and they have always been separate.
Mhm. Okay,
And
and oh, go ahead.
yeah, and the share ownership were not the same.
Okay, and so the actual like Mount Gay Distilleries was not actually at the not at a distillery. But it's in Bridgetown, basically more of like
Yes.
a bottling plant. That's Mount Gay Distillery, and the rum refinery of Mount Gay in St. Lucie to the north. That is the actual distillery where Mount Gay rum was made.
Yeah, and actually they used to age some of the rum at the distillery,
Okay.
but it was not called the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay because it was part of Fairfield and Mount Gay Company.
Right.
That was the original company that my great-grandfather started, which really encompassed all of the plantations that he had acquired. And it remained as Fairfield and Mount Gay Limited until about 1975, I believe, because at that time, the fortunes of the sugar industry and the rum industry were diverging. So the sugar industry's fortunes were declining, and the rum industry's fortunes were increasing. So the decision was taken to split the distillery operations from the plantation sugar cultivation operations. And out of that, the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay was born.
Yeah, and that part, and if I remember correctly, the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay remained as primarily within the Ward family for many, many years until very recently.
It remained from the time A.F. Ward bought the plantation with the distillery until 2014, when the distillery was sold to Mount Gay.
Okay. And Mount Gay being owned by Remy Cointreau. So.
Yes.
Okay. So. So you joined Mount Gay in 1998, and it wasn't long before you were the managing director. How did that come to be?
No, it took a few years, because I actually became the managing director in 2005, when my uncle, who was the managing director, great uncle, who was the managing director then, he retired.
Okay.
So I joined as the production manager.
Okay. And what were sort of the earlier what are some of the challenges you faced at the time? Like Mount Gay now is sort of the rum industry in Mount Gay now is sort of different than it was even 15, 20 years ago. What were the challenges you immediately faced upon sort of taking the managing director role?
Well, even before then, when I joined as production manager, one of the biggest challenges was, well, we've been doing it this way for decades. Why should we change?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole production process was based on word of mouth, and it did not actually move in terms of knowledge with the scientific knowledge that was available then. So everything was being done as it was done, say, still in the 40s. So that was the big challenge, to really put the whole process of fermentation and distillation on a scientific footing, in that, why are you doing this? You can't say you're doing it because this is how we've been doing it for so long.
Okay.
You might have been doing it incorrectly for so long.
Right.
So that was one of the challenges.
Yeah. Okay. So you brought a little more rigor to Mount Gay's rum making from when you started.
The fermentation and distillation, to improve really the efficiency of the production process, and also to try to maintain a consistent quality of production.
Okay. So let's now transition to WIRSPA. What were your earliest experiences with WIRSPA? Early meetings you went to. How did you become part of WIRSPA?
I think the first meeting that I attended was in 1999 in Miami, because in those days, WIRSPA is not as we know it now. It was not a legal entity. It was just a collection of distillers getting together to talk about matters of mutual interest. And most of the meetings were actually held outside of the Caribbean, because Miami, for example, was the easiest place for everyone to get to.
Right. Easier for everybody to get to Miami for everybody to get to a different island.
That is correct.
Okay.
So I attended those meetings simply, and again, it didn't have the structure that it has now. So anyone who was involved with a distillery could attend the meeting.
Right. Okay. So in those early days, that was when you joined, or your first meeting in 1999. That was right around the time of the Zero for Zero agreement and the negotiations for what would become the Caribbean rum sector program, basically EU funding to help distilleries modernize and prepare for a transition to a more premium rum industry rather than one based on bulk sales. You played some role in sort of helping Mount Gay with that program. Can you tell us about that?
Well, when I first started attending the WIRSPA meetings, was a learning process for me because not having had a very, very long background in rum industry, there was a lot I had to learn, not just about the actual production process, which I was fairly comfortable with, but all of the trade issues surrounding the production, sale, and export of rum. So for me, that was a learning process. So for uh, many of the meetings in the early days, I just sat and listened, right, just to get myself familiar with what's going on. And I will say that with the program itself, how it came to be approved by the European Union, that was primarily due to the efforts of Patrick Bears, Evan Brown, and Yesu Prasad. So they were the ones who provided our politicians with the arguments and the information they needed for them to make a case to the European Commission.
Okay.
But in those early days, I was not really a part of that.
Okay. Yes, and I'll just mention to our viewers that we have interviewed already Yasu Persod and Evan Brown, and we're trying to get Patrick Mayers on as well. And this is one of my favorite topics to chat with them about because it was a very transformative time in the Caribbean rum industry. As I recall from my reading, it was around once the EU program was, or the money was available, basically distilleries had to essentially put forth proposals for improvements, but they had to create detailed proposals. Did you participate in those for Mount Gay?
I did. I participated in a few smaller ones, and then a much larger one, which involved some upgrades of the distillery. But we came late to the game in terms of what our needs were. Because, for example, one of the biggest things that we had done prior to that, we had bought 2 new pot stills, and we also bought a vacuum still that was an ex-Barcelo still from the Dominican Republic. So we bought those before the program was approved.
Oh, okay.
So our needs in the ensuing years were not that great.
Okay. You had already invested. It's hard to get a refund after you've already yes.
That's correct.
Okay. So you became the managing director of the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay in 2005, and I believe at the time that would have also have made you, or very shortly at least, made you the WIRSPA representative for Barbados. And so it was only 2 years before you became the WIRSPA chairman. What was that process like? How did that go down?
Well, during the transition period, because how it came about was that Patrick had said to me once, because at that time I was Patrick's deputy for the Barbados Rum Committee, right? Okay. So I liaised very closely with him during that period. And there was one occasion when Patrick said he really wanted to retire because he had been at it long enough. And they thought that I would be the one to take over. I went, no, I can't do that. That's way too much work. I can't. Right. But they eventually prevailed upon me. And I was elected chairman in 2007. But my concern at the time was that could I do that? Because right at that time, that's when the EU assistance program was in full swing. So I had to devote a certain amount of time to that, and also to dealing with the issues that the Rum Refinery had. So it was a very, very challenging time.
Right. And that was a pretty fast, in the grand scheme of things, from joining Mount Gay in 1998, a rum refinery in 1998, to now the voice of the WIRSPA just 9 years later. That had to have been pretty like a rocket ship ride.
Well, I didn't see it that way. I mean, it was just, we were just going along quite nicely, and then suddenly, boom.
Yes. Yeah.
But I would say that to give Patrick his credit, that when he decided that he was going to retire, he then brought me more and more into the fold and included me in a lot of the discussions that he was having, and kept me in the loop. So when I actually took over from him, it wasn't that I was starting with a blank slate. I already had sufficient knowledge just from interacting with Patrick. So he smoothed my path.
Right. And just for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with Patrick Mayers, who was the managing director of West Indies Rum Distillery at the time. So
he's the chairman.
Yeah, the chairman. Yes. Oh, that's right. Thank you. So the Caribbean Rum Sector Program, which I mentioned already, it was, like you said, it was in full swing by the time you became WIRSPA chairman, but continued for almost your entire duration there, almost to the end of your duration. What were some of the biggest challenges and biggest successes of that program under your watch?
How much time do you actually have?
You go. We're here to hear your story.
One of the first issues that the beneficiaries would have had was meeting the requirements of the European Commission in order to qualify for getting the grant. So you first had to prepare a business plan, which a number of companies were not familiar with in the format that the EU or the Commission wanted it. And then there were also restrictions on how you put things out to tender, who can tender for the work, and then once the work is done, how the money is going to be reimbursed, because it was never given upfront. It was always a grant on a reimbursable basis. So the information that had to be provided in order to get reimbursement, that also was a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for a number of the distilleries.
Right. So, and what were were there any successes that you want to point to in particular, like particularly positive outcomes from running the program?
Well, according to the Commission's audit itself, it was one of the most successful programs of assistance that the European Commission had entered into. It was very, very well run. And yes, I said the hiccups were mainly related to the beneficiaries being able to fulfill the requirements of the EU rules for accessing the grant funding. But it did significantly help in number of, if not all of the distilleries in some form or fashion. Right. Some benefited from a multi-million-dollar program assistance, and others, again, on the basis of their needs, because again, it's on a reimbursable basis. So it wasn't free money. If you were given a grant, you had to go to the bank to borrow the money at commercial rates, and then you would get back a part of it after you have satisfactorily completed part of the fund, the cost of the program and the grant. So it required a great deal of attention to detail, which a lot of the smaller companies were not familiar with, because there were issues relating to supporting invoices to support your claim for reimbursement.
Right.
So those were really, technical managerial issues which we managed to work through. But
right. You were working with all these different companies to help them transition through that process.
Actually, it wasn't me specifically. It was the WIRSPA staff who did all of the hard work. I just sat on top and just kept an eye on everything.
Yeah.
Because one of the issues too was that one of the requirements for getting the program of assistance was that WIRSPA, the organization or the members, they had to put up a bond, right, in the event that something went wrong that was due to the fault of WIRSPA or its members. Okay. There was this bond which had to be paid to CARIFORUM, because remember, WIRSPA didn't get wasn't awarded the program itself. It was given to CARIFORUM.
Right.
CARIFORUM nominated WIRSPA, the organization, to implement on its behalf.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and then it was from this program that many distilleries, if many distilleries got substantial upgrades, maybe new stills, maybe new aging warehouses, new bottling lines, new marketing plans, things like that. But one of the most noticeable things still today that came out of that program was the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mark. Can you tell us a little bit about the impetus and the inception and how the Caribbean Authentic Caribbean Rum, or ACR rum, how that mark and this program came to be?
Well, that was originally always part of the overall program of assistance, because the ultimate goal of the program was to help the distilleries transition from being primarily producers of bulk rum to producing branded products. So the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mark was always an integral part of the program. And I would say that it actually exceeded the wildest expectations, because as a program in its own right, it was unique. And what it actually did, in my view, was to catalyze the awareness of rum in the minds of consumers worldwide, that rum was not simply a party drink where you had pirates or parrots on the label, that it was worthy of serious consideration for the connoisseur. And the Authentic Caribbean Rum program, it concentrated specifically on what Caribbean rum was. You know, rum is made in many other parts of the world. So this program wanted to define exactly what Caribbean rum was all about. So the CARICOM plus the Dominican Republic. And I think it did so extraordinarily successfully. It was a groundbreaking promotional campaign. And I think a lot of other rum companies, they sort of took some notes from what that program did, and they used it. But it certainly did achieve what it had intended to. It made the image of Caribbean rum that much more special and valuable.
Okay, and you briefly mentioned like the requirements. So is it fair to say that the requirements around about how it's made, the requirements to use the mark, are essentially in line with what is now the CARICOM rum standard?
That was the CARICOM rum standard, was the basis. So all the rums would have to conform to the requirements of the CARICOM rum standard. And then you had a tier formula. And that was also the subject of a great deal of discussion within the WIRSPA membership itself. And I will say that the marketing manager, Neil Morris, he really did a great job in getting everyone to a common position, because you will know that even though this was going to be a collective mark, individual distilleries, they're all competitors.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
He did a very, very good job in getting people to the point where they can agree on a common set of requirements, and also how the mark could be presented.
Right, and actually, if you're watching us, if you're looking at us now, you can actually see the mark up at the upper right of your screen there. That is the Authentic Caribbean Rum logo, which you might see on bottles. If you find a bottle of certainly your Mount Gilboa rum, I know it's on there. You'll see that logo, and I think a lot of people don't realize there's actually 3 tiers to the mark, like different like your base level, and then there's higher tiers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that tier structure came about after intense discussion with the members.
Okay.
So it's satisfying everyone.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioned Neil Morris. I could consider Neil Morris a good friend, and I remember being in Jamaica with him. That was like one of, I think it was the last trip that WIRSPA organized for journalists and writers, and that also was part of the Caribbean Rum Sector program as well. So
I will give you an interesting detail here. When they were doing the preliminary work to develop the content for the Authentic Caribbean Mark campaign, a survey was done in UK, Spain, and Italy. Those were the original 3 markets where the campaign ran. And in Italy and Spain, when you spoke about Caribbean, they thought Cuba or maybe the Dominican Republic.
Right.
The Anglophone Caribbean did not feature in their collective minds at all, at all, at all. So while we in the Caribbean may say we are the birthplace of rum, right? That is not necessarily seen at that time. It has changed now, right? But we were not necessarily seen at that time as being the birthplace of rum because a lot of the respondents to the survey they had not even heard of any of the countries.
Mm-hmm. Right. Good. I had not heard that story. So now your involvement with the Rum Refinery of Mount Gay ended in I think 2012 or 2014, whenever exactly when it was sold to
2014.
2014 when it was sold to Remy Cointreau. So your involvement with the sort of day-to-day management, anything having to do with Rum Refinery of Mount Gay, ended in 2012, but you continued on as chairman of WIRSPA for another 5 years or so, or 3 to 5 years or so.
From 14 to 2017, I stepped down.
So at least 3 years. Did not having to worry about Rum Refinery of Mount Gay, did that make your WIRSPA responsibilities easier or harder?
Oh, it made it a lot easier because I then had a lot more time on my hands. So prior to that, I would be working probably 10 to 12-hour days. So I will do the rum refineries work during the day and then deal with WIRSPA issues in the evening. So then taking the rum refinery out of the equation allowed me a lot more flexibility and more time to deal with WIRSPA issues. So yes, it made things a lot easier for me.
Right. But so not having your day-to-day sort of head in the actual rum production process didn't cause any issues for you.
No, I was actually asked to stay on and as chairman until 2017, and I said, really, it's time for me to step down because I've been there for 10 years. It's time for someone else to take over.
Right. So besides the rum sector program, which is obviously, I'm sure, took an enormous amount of your time, what else besides that was sort of the focus of your activities while you were CEO, or not CEO, while you were the chairman of WIRSPA? What else were you working on?
The rum cover over program.
Tell us about that. Many people aren't familiar with the cover over program.
That, in a nutshell, all rums produced in the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, sold in the U.S. market. A portion of it went back to the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico in proportion to how much rum they sold. But what it also included was the rums that we, the WIRSPA members, sold into the U.S. market. So a proportion of those sales also went back to, I shouldn't say the sales, the excise tax.
You're right.
Yeah. So a proportion of the excise tax that the WIRSPA members were paying to the U.S. government went back to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And let's just say that we felt that in 2000 and I can't remember when, I'm not calling any names, but there was a shift in the marketplace in terms of production, which we felt skewed the market unfavorably against us. And we brought it to the attention of our respective governments. We actually did spend quite a lot of money on legal advice, and we prepared a document outlining what the issues were, where the damage is likely to be done to the Caribbean rum industry, and what possible remedies would be available. But of course, you're now talking about a situation that is outside of the purview of a trade organization. So that is strictly for the governments to deal with. And unfortunately, we didn't get very far.
Right. Yeah.
We had the support. We had the the support verbally, but the process and the remedies, it would have taken a hell of a long time.
So the thing is, like, people don't realize about that when you describe cover over very, very well, but sort of to emphasize that point is that the excise tax paid by Barbados producers and Jamaican producers, the excise tax paid to the U.S. government were actually, again, being returned to the governments of Puerto Rico, to Puerto Rico and to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and then in turn some of that flows to those producers. So in essence, some of your excise taxes could be considered to be subsidizing your competitors in those islands.
Correct.
Yes,
that is correct.
Okay, so now let's go back to Mount Gay. So what were some of the most significant changes to the distillery during your 7 years as the managing director? Like once you were in charge, like what are some of the improvements to the distillery you implemented?
Well, it started even before I became managing director, because when I was the production manager, I was in charge of all production processes. So the acquisition of the 2 new pot stills, the acquisition of the vacuum still from Barcelona, and just a basic change in the way the fermentation and distillation was done, just to make it more efficient. I'll say one of the issues that we had was the appearance of ethyl carbamate in the distillate for the light rum. And we could not figure out for a while why this was so, until we realized that the original operating manual that the designer of the still gave to us included recycling of the heads. And that was to ensure that you recapture as much of the alcohol as possible. But that's where the ethyl carbamate was coming in. So once we stopped recycling the heads, we no longer had the problem.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about why ethyl carbamate is a problem?
It is supposedly a carcinogen, and there is a bit of doubt as to, because the levels required in spirits are much lower than those allowed in, say, like wines. All right, so we think that that's a bit unfair, but that was the regulation. So you have to conform with the regulation. So we put into place various mechanisms to deal with it, including sending our samples off to Scotland on almost on a monthly basis to have the analysis done for the presence of ethyl carbamate and how much. Also made some changes to our fermentation procedures, because originally they were all in open vats, and in an open vat there's a hell of a lot of alcohol being lost through evaporation. So just a simple process, and a few dollars, we covered the vats with some wooden covers, wooden coats, and that saved a significant amount in terms of the loss of alcohol.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the other, to add to sort of what you were saying about the ethyl carbamate, is some countries like Canada, for example, have maximum allowed limits. Like in theory, like if they test your rum and it's above that limit, you can't bring it in, because it would
everybody
actually,
does.
Yeah.
The CARICOM rum standard does have a limit to how much ethyl carbamate can be present in your spirit. So it's those things. Again, why I mentioned that was that the distillery was operating according to the instructions of the designer of
Right.
the continuous still, and that was actually causing the problem.
Right, for sure.
So with that, I also made some changes to how we distill the pot still rum. For example, with the retorts, I was told from day one that you charge the retorts with high wines or low wines, right? But I didn't. I said, no. We're going to charge them with water. And you will discharge the water at the end of every distillation run. Because what we were doing is that we were taking some of the heads and putting it into the pot still distillation. And by using water as the charge for the pots, we were actually removing all of the ethyl carbamate.
Oh, interesting.
So I stopped doing charging retorts with high wines and low wines a long time ago.
Okay, and that's actually a good segue into the next topic, which is during your 7 to 9 years. I should know this. During your time as managing director, you also introduced the Mount Gilboa brand. So tell us how that came about, and what was your thinking in creating this brand?
That was a little bit of a pet project, and it also came out of the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mart program, in that we were a distillery without a brand, because we sold all of the product to Mount Gay Distilleries Limited. and there was not any left over to do anything. And plus, we didn't have the base of which to do that kind of thing. It was a pet project of mine for a number of years, and I tinkered with it for quite a few years actually, until we actually decided that the best distillate for us was to distill it 3 times, because the problem was we were selling pot still rum to Mount Gay and also the light rum. So all of what we sold to Mount Gay, right? I couldn't then didn't want to use that to produce a spirit, because it would then just be a Mount Gay clone.
Right.
So I had to come up with a completely different way of fermentation and also distillation. And I decided on pot stills only, not the light rum, because we know how to do pot still rum very, very well.
Right.
So we tinkered around with various types of distillation, various cuts. I actually did 4 distillations, but that wasn't really very palatable. So with the 3 distillations and the cuts that we took from each distillation, that was a work in progress for a very long time. And I actually took samples up to the UK with me and trial them in bars. Say, the bartenders, tell me, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? So it was an iterative process.
Right. Yeah. So just to clarify, like, I know I've asked you this before, but for the benefit of our viewers, when you say 3 distillations, you mean run through the double retort system 3 distinct times.
That's correct.
That is correct. Okay.
That's
so
correct.
yes. Okay. Yeah. So some of us are lucky enough to have bottles from Mount Gilboa. You bottled some. It was available for a while. There still may be some bottles out there in the wild, but there's a particular unicorn bottling of that, which is the unaged Mount Gilboa, and I'm very fortunate that you gave me a bottle when I saw you in Barbados a few years ago. Tell us about the unaged Mount Gilboa.
That again, I looked at the white spirits around the market, and I thought to myself, why would something like a tequila, which is unaged, command such a high premium? There is qualitatively no real difference between tequila and rum in terms of the actual product, in the bottle. So my thing was, let's try this. And I actually had a bottle of tequila ocho, and I used that as a template. I said, let me see if I can distill rum where it won't, a pot still rum, so it does not have to be aged, and it can be drunk straight from the still. So again, the white Mount Gilboa is triple distilled in the same way as the dark, but the cuts were completely different. The actual distillation process for each distillation was different to the other Mount Gilboa. So my whole aim was to produce something that tasted like a tequila and could be drunk straight from the still without aging.
Okay. Excellent.
The only problem with that was that the cost of doing that was quite high. So I only ever produced about 400 cases, and most of it went to the US.
Okay. Well, to our benefit here in the US. So, and if I remember correctly, the rum you distilled for the Mount Gilboa project, what you had left over, you eventually sold off when you sort of exited that part of the rum industry.
Yes, the bottle inventory that remained was distributed among the shareholders. The barrel inventory was sold to Velier.
Okay, and we know that today as the last ward.
Yes. And half of that inventory, Velier sold on to Cognac Ferrand.
Okay, yeah. And I happen to have a bottle of that as well. So, moving towards the end here. So you stepped down from your WIRSPA role in 2017. What have you been doing since then?
I've been taking on some small consultancies if I feel like. So one of the ones that I did quite early on after I stepped down was to help Samoan artisanal distillers to get his distillation operations up and running. So I used to go there a few times to show them how to do the fermentation and distillation in the most efficient way possible, and also sort of barrels that they would use. So they have got their product on the market now, Rum Pepper, the white rum, and I'm quite proud of that. And I've got another one coming up, which I won't say anything much about right now.
Okay, yes. And I was lucky to visit San Juan Artisan Distillers in May. I met Pepe. Do you want to share a little bit about what makes San Juan Artisan sort of special, especially coming from Puerto Rico?
They are a pure pot still rum producer. They have 4 pot stills. 3 of them came from the former 10 Cane distillery. Do you remember 10 Cane rum?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he bought the 3 pots. They're Chalvignac pots, just a pot and a worm condenser. There are no retorts to them. And he also has a Holstein still with a rectifier attached. So he does the first distillation in the Chalvignac pots and then does the redistillation in the Holstein pots, with or without rectification, depending on what they want. Because I just show them how to. I said, I'm not going to tell you anything about the taste because it's your rum. So you decide what taste you want.
Yeah, and it is unusual in that it's entirely cane juice distillate. It's no molasses.
The Pepon is entirely cane juice, but he does do molasses rum also.
Right. Yeah. There's the Tres Clavos brand, but the cane juice rum is exciting because there's actually once again sugarcane growing in Puerto Rico, which is I think it's an overall trend in the industry as more and more distilleries are realizing that distilling from sugarcane directly rather than from molasses is sort of the wave of the future.
Well, it's I would say that's one, string to the bow. My personal view about how the industry will evolve in terms of the product itself, you will see more and more distillers concentrating on the actual fermentation and distillation. Because for a very long time, the aging in different woods, that has been the thing. But I think that almost everybody is doing that now. So you need to have some sort of difference which sets you apart from your competitors, especially if you're a small brand.
Right.
So focusing on how you distill, how you ferment, I think that for especially a smaller brand is probably the way to go.
Right. So I think what you're saying is aging is good and important, and finishes are fine, but it's not enough. That the next wave of evolution is going to be sort of going back to the basics even earlier in the creation process. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Well, I've always said, for me, if you want to know how good a distiller is, taste the white rum.
Right.
Because it is just off the still, and it's not been amended with the benefits of the barrel and aging and everything. If you have started off with a very good product, you should be able to drink it right away. There's a misconception that white rum gives you a terrible headache. That's not so. White rum is not supposed to give you a headache at all.
Right. And that brings up a recollection I had from talking with you when we were sitting on the beach in Barbados. When you mentioned, like, at least during your tenure at Mount Gay, which are at the Rum Refinery, what your favorite Mount Gay expression was, and that was surprising to me. Like, can you share that with us?
Yeah, at that time, my favorite Mount Gay was Eclipse, because I always thought that Eclipse was probably, in my opinion, the best all-around rum ever made, because it can be drank neat, it can be sipped on the rocks, does well in mixers, does well in cocktails. So Eclipse for me was the best all-around rum ever. It was the benchmark. Now, for me, the benchmark is actually the Eclipse Silver, the white version. It's on the market now.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Again, that is my personal preference, because I am not overly fond of very aged rums.
Right.
That's why the Mount Gilboa that was bottled, it was 4 years old.
Right.
For me, that is just about right. Anything above that doesn't work for me. That's my personal preference.
Right. So I think we mentioned it's essentially like maybe 3, 4, 5 years is a sweet spot. That was not that it's not good after that, but like it should, if it's good out of the still, 3, 4, 5 years should be plenty for it.
Yeah, that, and then as I said, that's my preference. If I ask for rum, I might say that I don't drink rum outside of the Caribbean because what's on offer, right, outside of the Caribbean, I'm not that interested. And I am being a rum snob here in that I prefer to drink Caribbean rum.
Yep.
Doesn't have to be from Barbados, but Caribbean rum. That's what I drink.
Excellent. So somehow we have no questions here, anybody. No question. Nobody's asked a question. I think we've done a great job of covering what you have to say. So any final words before we head out?
No, just Matt, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to chat to the people in the ethosphere. I think that the rum industry does have a very, very bright future. If you are able to see beyond all of the smoke and mirrors and sometimes a lot of angry words being put about, I think overall we have come a very, very long way. And rum has now, in my mind, attained a status where it is seen as a premium drink. It is no longer simply a rum shop drink to be consumed in the rum shop. So I think that for me is a great deal of satisfaction, and a lot of that is due to the promotional campaign that WIRSPA developed.
Right. Yeah, and to echo your point, that indeed, as an outsider who now sort of has more access than most people, I'm sort of amazed at how much Caribbean rum has evolved, changed just in the last, even in the last 10 years, just how much it's elevated, and people's perception of it has improved. And certainly an enormous part of that is due to people like you and Yasu and Kamal and Patrick Mayer and all these people who've led WIRSPA over the years. So thank you very much for doing this with us. Will, you want to take us out?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to echo what Matt said, we didn't have many questions, but we have a lot of people in the comments talking about what a great session it was. Scott French, by the way, pointed out that he has been drinking a bottle of early 2000s Mount Gay Eclipse for the past week and finds it to be a terrific balance of oak, fruit, and spice. So you're not alone in your sentiment there, Frank. But yeah, just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And Matt, I think we've got a few more things in the works right now, as you alluded to. So if you're in attendance right now, just keep an eye on your email inbox. We'll be sending out some announcements on those coming up shortly. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Anything else to add, Matt?
Yeah, no, just to add what you were saying, we have another WIRSPA executive chairman coming up, not too distant future, and a very special one. Not a WIRSPA executive chairman, but one I think a lot of people are going to want to turn into. So we're very excited about that. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks to both of you again for this presentation. Thanks to everyone for attending, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Take care, everybody.